Prepare for a rude awakening.
Shalom, Torah fans. This is Michael Rood welcoming you to episode 4 in the 11-part series, The Creator's Calendar and the Restoration of All Things. Learning to heed the still, small voice of the Holy Spirit and learning to separate the desires manufactured in one's own mind from the genuine leading of the Spirit is a journey of discovery that lasts a lifetime. In my experience, obedience appears to be the key. When you hear from heaven, or when you think that you have heard from heaven, obey, no matter what it costs you. That obedience is honored by heaven. When you have asked for bread, you can be confident that He will not give you a stone which looks like bread, but will bust all the teeth out of your mouth. If you are following your own desires, you will end up with a bloody mouth. But if you are following His leading, even though it may look bleak at times, He will never leave you or forsake you. Many people have derided me over the years for attempting to restore the Creator's calendar. My personal journey has been directed by a sincere desire to understand the Gospels and the ministry of my Lord and Messiah, Yahshua. I was looking for neither acceptance nor controversy, just truth. This divine quest has led me to doors that have opened which no man can shut. And I have also hammered on doors that were shut that I was powerless to open. In this series, I invite you to join me as I walk through the open doors that I pray will change your perspective of the Scriptures like no man could ever do. Join me in this amazing adventure of discovering the Creator's reckoning of time so that we, the children of light, might not be ignorant of His times and His seasons. The Creator's calendar and the Feast of the Lord are detailed prophetic shadow pictures of good things to come.
We live in an amazing time of restoration. For nearly 2,000 years, the Jewish people were scattered across the lands of the dispersion, and now we're back in the land of Israel.
A Rood Awakening Television presents The Creator's Calendar and the Restoration of All Things. A special presentation from Israel by Michael Rood and Nehemiah Gordon.
As I was working on some of these mathematical, astronomical, and calendrical problems to understand the Gospels and times in antiquity, I was in the state of Texas working with a brilliant graphic artist, Richard Fike, and we were producing timeline proof charts as well as the astronomically corrected biblical Hebrew calendar. And it was during this period of time we were working month after month, sometimes around the clock for days, to produce these things as we were really discovering incredible treasures in the Gospels. And as we were doing this, I was having such a hard time because I was raised in a Western paradigm, a Western Gentile world, and I too was raised knowing nothing about the biblical calendar. And so dealing with these calendar issues, I had to step over into another world that I found a little bit difficult at the time. But I woke up one morning from a dream, and I don't even know what the dream was. But I turned to the wall and I began writing on the wall with my finger. And I realized as I made the marks on the wall with my finger, invisible marks, that all of a sudden I understood the biblical reckoning of time. I thought in Hebrew reckoning of time. It was like a shift that came about, and at that moment, I had understanding. The Greeks have a word for it as synesis. It is the point at which all the rivers flow together, all the little streams flow together and connect at one point where they make a powerful stream. And at that moment I had synesis, and it came from not my own intellect, it just came from waking up in the Almighty putting this in my mind and in my heart. It was there. Within 2 days, we found out that the house that we were living in at that time was being sold and would necessitate us moving. But as we were praying about where to move, the phone rang. It was someone from Minnesota. I'd never met them before. They told me that they were standing in line in a department store when the person in line in front of them turned around and started to discuss with them some of my teachings concerning the calendar and the feast of the Lord. And this person then got my number, called me up and said, I have a house up in Two Harbors, Minnesota, where I had been up there teaching before. In fact, it was the first place that I actually taught, and at that point left my work that I was doing and went on the road to teach full time. And when she called me up and said that we have a house up in Two Harbors and it's yours, it's fully furnished, and I said, well, how much do you need? And said, that's not an issue, just come up, move in, this place is yours. The Lord told me to call you and give you this place. Well, we packed up everything, moved up to Two Harbors, and when we got there, I stayed there one night, but something was not quite right. I didn't feel like this really was the place that we were to be. And I walked downtown Two Harbors, and I walked by a building that I'd walked by several times over the last few years. It was the old Two Harbors Theater. This time it was empty. And something had been drawing me about this building, and as I stood in front of it again and prayed about this building again, as I looked in there, I could see this is a place that I could work. And so after I prayed, I went a couple blocks over to the city hall, and I looked in the records to find out who owned the building. Their phone number was in the records. I called them up, and I said, I would like to buy the Two Harbors Theater from you. And the gentleman on the other end said that he was the owner of it, and that it was empty right now. And I said, I know, I was just there. And I said, but I have a problem. I don't have any money. And he said, well, what do you mean you don't have any money? And I said, well, I don't have any money. And he said, well, why do you want the theater then? And so I went on to explain that I saw that this place, as I prayed there, that I really felt that this could be used for ministry and for helping us in our work that we were doing with the biblical calendar. And he said, well, I bought this originally for my daughter and her husband, and I had it refurbished and renovated to be ministry headquarters for them, but everything fell through and it was never used for that. He said, I don't think money is the issue. Can you afford $1? And I said, I think I could get together $1. And he said, well, let's do it this way. I'll rent it to you for the first year for $1, and after that, then we'll talk about price. We'll see how it works for you. And so 2 days later, a 72-year-old man riding a white Harley Davidson came up to Two Harbors. We signed the papers. I got my $1, handed it to him, and it was a done deal. I was given one piece of equipment, and that was a large commercial copier. I didn't know what I was going to use this for, but I set it in the building, and then it dawned on me. We took reams of paper and began making calendars, blank calendars by the hundreds. And from one end of that empty theater, which had no seats in it, to the other end, row after row, I made columns of calendars going back in antiquity over 2,000 years. And then I got on the phone with Robert Scott Wadsworth, who is a biblical astronomer, and we began hammering out dates in the past using an astronomy program that was not available until just recently. And so we did our calculations for the percentage of illumination above the city of Jerusalem and the degree of above the horizon. We did this so we could figure out these ancient years, these ancient calendars, and to figure out in the Gospels where Yahshua was at these different points in time, because we knew where he was according to the feasts. And so as we put together these things, at the end of it, what we produced was the first astronomically corrected biblical Hebrew calendar. and I took this to Jerusalem. Now, when I arrived in Jerusalem, I arrived a little bit late. I tried to get here for the Day of Trumpets, for the new moon of Tishri 1. But as I was flying into Israel, I saw the first sliver of the new moon appear, and when I landed in Israel, I went down to the wall to pray. And as I was praying, I asked that the Almighty would show me the people in the land of Israel to whom I would need to get connected in order to make sure that our calculations were correct and to make sure that we were online for determining the beginning of the seventh or Sabbath millennium. Well, I left the wall and went down to visit for some friends of mine. Mika Harari, he and his wife had a harp shop in downtown Jerusalem, Harari's Harps. They were the first ones to make biblical harps since this land became desolate 2,000 years ago. And as I went in to his shop, he was there early in the morning, and we began speaking. And I told him that as I flew in, I saw the first sliver of the new moon, and I was talking about the biblical calendar to him. And as we were talking about this issue, he looked through the glass doors, seeing a gentleman walk up to the harp shop, and he said, "This is incredible. You have got to meet this guy. You are on the same page as this guy." The door opens, and a tall, lanky Jewish gentleman walks in, paying no attention to me, looking right into Mika Harari's eyes, and said, "You could not see the new moon on Friday night, you couldn't see it on Saturday night, you could not see the new moon until last night. We missed Rosh Hashanah, the Day of Trumpets, by both days this year. We missed the feast by both days." Mika said, "What difference does it make? What difference does it make? We just go by the Pharisee calendar anyway. What difference does it make?" And I turned to this gentleman, I said, "Was the new moon 1.5% illuminated, 13 degrees above the horizon, 17 minutes after sunset?" His jaw dropped, his eyes opened up, and at that moment, he knew that I knew that it makes all the difference in the world, because we were talking about the Creator's original reckoning of time. As we began to discuss things, I found that for the last 8 years that he had been keeping careful records of the sighting of the new moon from Israel. In fact, he built the roof of his house as an observatory to sight the new moon from Tekoa, where Amos was a sheep herder in the days of ancient Israel. It is from there that each month he would sight the new moon, and he would be on the telephone with sometimes hundreds of people around the land of Israel who were also inspired to restore the ancient biblical reckoning of time. These were all Orthodox Jews, all Pharisees. But yet they knew that when they entered back into the land, there would be a point in time that we would go back to the Creator's reckoning of time. Well, that began a very exciting time with Bruce Brill and our beginning to work on the calendar together. It was at the end of the Feast of Tabernacles, after working with Bruce Brill and having published an article in the newspaper here in Jerusalem concerning the astronomically corrected biblical Hebrew calendar, that we then went back to America. Hours after I landed, I was on a TBN program up in the Northwest where I met some very interesting and dear friends now. And it is there that, again, I was proclaiming Tishri 1, 6001, the beginning of the day or millennium of the Lord, would occur, according to our calculations, on September 11th, 1999. And through the years, as I was teaching that all over America, I finally then made my final plans to get back to Israel, and I arrived here just at the time of the new moon for Tishri 1. When I arrived, all was quiet. And as the days passed, I then began to question whether the calculations were accurate. See, I had corrected the modern Jewish calendar by 240 years at that point. I was determining the beginning of the year in the month of Tishri, Rosh Hashanah, which is a rabbinic tradition. And so I went out into the sheep caves of Tekoa and spent several days camping and praying and asking the Almighty to please tell me what to do. Because I felt like the calculations were wrong. They were the best that we had, but I felt that they were wrong. And so finally I made my way back to Jerusalem. And when I got there, Bruce Brill presented me with an article that was done by an Egyptian archaeologist that had corrected the calendar according to information that was available in the Egyptian calendar to 241 years off. Of course, this sparked my interest. It's the first information that I received concerning the date, the years being off by one. And then, within a few days, I met Eugene Faustich, who for over 30 years was a professional biblical chronologist. We met together for a few hours, and he gave me several of his books on biblical chronology. And I hid away in an apartment, and for the next 2 weeks, night and day, it didn't matter, I went around the clock studying his books. See, in order for me to understand biblical chronology, I have got to have at least 2 weeks in order to load up my random access memory. There is so much information that I have got to freshly load into my mind before I can even start thinking about biblical chronology. It's not a simple science at all. But in Eugene Faustich's work, I saw some real treasures in there that I went back to him and thanked him profusely because it set us back up on a course. Now, within just a few weeks, Bruce Brill gave me a call and said that I had been invited to attend the annual meeting of the Israeli New Moon Society. And why I was invited is because my calendar, the astronomically corrected biblical Hebrew calendar, had been making its circuit in Israel for over a year at that point, and it had gotten into the hands of some rabbinical scholars, and they knew that our calculations were dead on. They were very excited about it, and so Bruce Brill and I went to this particular meeting. Now, the meeting discussing biblical topics in Israel, it's all going to be in Hebrew. And so Bruce was my interpreter. And at the beginning of the meeting, he began interpreting everything, and then he said, I'm just going to interpret what you don't know. And so he sat there sometimes for 45 minutes, sometimes it was an hour, and he said nothing because most of this stuff was familiar to me. But it came time for the keynote speaker. And as the keynote speaker took the dais and was arranging his notes up on the table, Bruce went up to him and told him that I was there. And he looked back at me, he nodded, and the two of them left the dais and came back, and he began to speak to me. And he said that he had studied my calendar, and he said that you are beginning the year on this corrected calendar in the month of Tishri. The month of Tishri, being Rosh Hashanah, is a rabbinic tradition. It's a tradition that I've grown up with, and of course you're familiar with, but it is a tradition. That is not the original biblical calendar. Now I have to admit that many times in my studies and my thinking, I default to rabbinic teaching just because that is where most of the information has come from. When people look at modern Judaism, they look at the teachings of the rabbis and they see that rabbis, being a sect of the Pharisees, that's actually one contingency of the Jewish people. It's not all of their scholarship by any means. And as he told me that there is something that I need to do to make the final corrections so that the calendar is absolutely accurate, and then on the corner of a sheet of a paper, he wrote down a name and a phone number. He wrote it very small, he tore it off and put it under the end of his thumb, and as he stood there, he said, you need to give this person a call as quickly as possible. Now, don't let anyone in this room see the name that's on this paper, or it will get both of us thrown out of here. Do you understand? I said, I understand. Now, I didn't understand why we get both of us thrown out of here, but I understood I didn't want to get thrown out, and this was to be a secret. So he removed his thumb. I put my thumb over it, rolled it to the edge of the table, curled it up in a ball, slipped it in my pocket, and the next morning, we were sitting at a cafe in downtown Jerusalem with a gentleman named Nehemiah Gordon. And as he explained his background, his father was a rabbi for many generations. His great-grandfathers were rabbis going back for 30 generations, but yet he said that he began to question the teachings of the rabbis as a young man going to Hebrew school, and he came to the conclusion that the Pharisees had added commandments to the scripture. They'd taken commandments away. They had violated the very thing that Moses said no one was allowed to do, add to or take away commandments. And he said that he himself had decided to become a scripturalist. The ancient Hebrew term is karaite. Kara being the ancient Hebrew word for scriptures, and so a karaite is one who only goes by the Hebrew scriptures and does not accept any proposed authority by the rabbis and accepts none of their innovations or their teachings as far as what righteousness is, and he certainly didn't accept their calendar. Well, in that meeting with Nehemiah, then I understood why the Pharisees, the Orthodox Jews, knew that he carried information that was absolutely vital to the restoration of the calendar, and that's what that meeting was all about. But yet they didn't want to acknowledge him because he refused to acknowledge their authority to have changed the calendar in the first place. Nehemiah explained that the Karaites throughout history were the ones that refused to accept any of the rabbinic traditions and instead only went by the Hebrew scriptures. And they also were the group of Jews who kept the biblical calendar, and it was actually part of their culture and part of their wedding ceremony to swear to keep the original biblical calendar. As Nehemiah began to detail these things, he then knew that we were very familiar with the astronomically corrected calendar, the sighting of the new moon in Israel, but the particular part that Nehemiah had been working on for 10 years, and the very part that the Pharisees, the ultra-Orthodox Jews who were working on the restoration of the calendar, the very thing that they knew that he had that was essential in reestablishing the original biblical calendar was the reestablishing of the agricultural term Aviv. Now I'm going to let Nehemiah give you much more detail on this, but I'm going to give you just enough so that you understand where we were at this point. Nehemiah went on to explain that it was in the month of the Aviv that we came out of Egypt. And it is in the month of the Aviv we were commanded to keep the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And during the Feast of Unleavened Bread, on the day after the weekly Sabbath, we are to present the first fruits of the barley harvest in the temple as the wave offering. It is only after that wave offering that is done are we then allowed to eat of the barley of that year's harvest. And so the barley, being Aviv, has always been the benchmark for the beginning of the year. Whether it's the vernal equinox, whether there are conjunctions, no matter what is going on astronomically, that is not how the Creator told us to keep time originally. Nehemiah had worked now for over 10 years in establishing what the agricultural term Aviv means. And according to all of the rabbinic, all of the Orthodox scholars in the land of Israel, Nehemiah Gordon is without a doubt the expert in this field, and that is why they sent me to Nehemiah to ferret out these particular details. Well, when we met that day, we found it so interesting in our relationship together. He said, "Can we meet tomorrow?" And just Nehemiah and I met, and we sat there for hours and hours that day. And that is what began our relationship in working together on these things. Over the next few weeks, we planted 8 barley fields in the land of Israel. Some of these fields we planted in the very places that the Levites had planted them so that they would have the first fruit harvest in immediate access to the temple during the temple period. And this was the first time that barley was planted in Israel in nearly 2,000 years in order to reckon the Aviv barley in the land. I can, with complete confidence, say that I was led by the Holy Spirit to connect with people in Jerusalem who have been crucial in the process of restoring the calendar. Yet I can also say with conviction that I do not fully agree with any of these individuals, but I have been able to glean treasures from each, and I respect them all. To assert that I agree with every principle held by the Israeli New Moon Society would be absurd. Yet their intellectual and scientific expertise in their particular field of study far surpasses that of any Christian institution in the same field. Nehemiah Gordon is both a scholar and my friend. We have had our disputes in the past, and there are many topics on which we adamantly disagree. Yet in his field of expertise, I trust Nehemiah intellectually and morally. Nehemiah was raised in an Orthodox Jewish home. He does not believe in Yahshua as the Messiah, even though he does see the truth in many of his teachings. The fact that Nehemiah is not a messianic believer is troubling to some people who avow that Christians should never listen to or learn from anyone who does not have an authorizing checkmark on each point of their particular statement of faith. When I need a mechanic to fix my Chevy, I do not ask Mr. Goodwrench for a statement of faith. And when I need an expert in Hebrew hermeneutics or Talmudic takanot, I will consult Nehemiah over Billy Graham any day, regardless of what Mr. Goodwrench thinks. Join us again next time as we continue our adventure of discovering the Creator's calendar and the restoration of all things. This is Michael Rood bidding you shalom, peace, and I will see you when the smoke clears.